I was standing barefoot in the kitchen at 4:30 in the morning, holding a cracked mug, when my husband told me I had stopped trying. The floor was cold, the coffee tasted burned, and I remember thinking that if I dropped the mug on purpose, at least the sound would match how I felt inside. He didn't raise his voice. That made it worse. He said it calmly, like a conclusion he had reached after careful thought, like a diagnosis. You don't try anymore. You used to. Now, you just exist. He said it while scrolling on his phone, not even looking at me, as if the words were a fact about the weather, not about the woman who had been awake since before dawn for the 3rd year in a row. I wanted to ask him what exactly he meant by trying, but I already knew. He meant smiling more. He meant being lighter. He meant being less tired in ways that were invisible to him. He meant not sighing when the washing machine broke again, not forgetting to buy his favorite yogurt, not falling asleep halfway through conversations that happened after 10 at night. He meant the version of me that existed before the weight of everything settled into my bones. The kitchen smelled like old toast and detergent. Our son was asleep in the next room, his backpack already packed for school because I had done it the night before, after finishing a report for work, while answering emails on my phone. I had slept 3 hours. He had slept 7. He still said I wasn't trying. I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, I felt something close to embarrassment, the kind that heats your skin and makes you aware of your posture, your clothes, your hair pulled into a knot that hadn't been brushed properly in days. I suddenly saw myself through his eyes. A woman in an old sweater, dark circles under her eyes, moving on autopilot between tasks. Not attractive. Not trying. When we first moved into this apartment, I used to wake up early because I wanted to. I would make breakfast with music playing softly, eggs still warm, coffee strong and fresh. I would kiss him goodbye at the door, and he would tell me I smelled like vanilla. That was before the deadlines multiplied, before daycare calls, before his job became unstable and mine quietly absorbed the shock without asking permission. The morning he said it, I had already been awake for an hour answering messages from my manager, coordinating a presentation, and checking our bank account to make sure the payment for the electricity had gone through. I had fixed a loose button on my son's jacket while listening for the sound of the elevator in the hallway because it made the baby monitor crackle. My body was present. My mind was juggling invisible plates. He saw none of it. He finally looked up when I didn't respond. His expression shifted slightly. Irritation mixed with disappointment, like I was failing a test he hadn't told me about. You don't even react anymore, he said. That's part of the problem. I wanted to laugh. React? To what? To exhaustion. To carrying the weight quietly because someone had to. To the constant low-level panic that comes from knowing that if I stop moving, everything stops with me. But I swallowed it, because explaining takes energy too, and I was already running on empty. Later that day, at work, I stared at my screen and reread the same sentence over and over. My chest felt tight, not from sadness, but from the strange guilt that had settled there. What if he was right? What if I really had stopped trying? What if all of this was my fault because I had let myself become this version of me, the one who measures days in tasks completed instead of moments lived? In the afternoon, I picked up our son from school. He ran toward me with a crooked smile and a missing tooth, his shoes untied, his hands sticky with something sweet. "Mommy, look," he said, holding up a drawing. It was of our family. Stick figures, uneven, but intentional. I was the tallest one. I was drawn with thick arms. I didn't know why that detail made my throat tighten. That evening I cooked dinner while helping with homework, answering a call from work and listening to my husband complain about traffic. He asked what was for dinner, then sighed when I told him. "We used to eat out more," he said. "We used to have fun." He didn't say used to be happy, but that was implied, and the implication settled on my shoulders like another unpaid bill. I went to bed before him. Not because I wanted to, but because my body shut down. I lay there in the dark, listening to the distant hum of the city, replaying his words over and over. "You stopped trying." It echoed louder than anything else. It erased the effort of every small thing I did that no one applauded. The next few weeks blurred together. Nothing changed on the surface, but something shifted inside me. I started noticing how often he used that tone, the one that made me feel like I was always behind, always failing an invisible standard. He would comment on my mood, my clothes, my silence. He never commented on the bills being paid, the fridge being full, the child being cared for, the house functioning. I began apologizing for things I hadn't done wrong. Sorry I'm tired. Sorry I forgot. Sorry I didn't feel like talking. Each apology made it easier for him to believe his version of the story. That I was the problem. That I had changed. That I was the reason something was missing. One night, after our son was asleep, he told me he missed how I used to be. He said it softly, almost tenderly, like a confession. I asked him if he missed how hard I used to try to keep everything together, or if he just missed how easy it was to be with me when I wasn't carrying so much. He didn't answer. Silence can be an answer too. I started waking up even earlier. Not because I needed more time, but because sleep felt pointless. In those quiet hours, I would sit at the table and stare at my hands, the faint lines, the chipped nails, the signs of work no one noticed. I wondered when exactly I had crossed the line from being a partner to being a function. The worst part wasn't that he didn't see my effort. It was that I started not seeing it either. I began to measure my worth by his dissatisfaction, by the gap between who I was and who he wanted me to be. I became careful, quiet, efficient, convenient. One afternoon, I forgot to pick up his dry cleaning. It was a small thing. He didn't yell. He just looked at me and said, "See, this is what I mean." I felt my face burn. I wanted to scream that I had just come from a meeting where my job was on the line, that I had picked up our son, cooked dinner, answered emails, scheduled a doctor's appointment, and still somehow failed because of a shirt. That night, I sat in the bathroom with the door locked, the light off, just breathing. I realized I was more afraid of disappointing him than of disappearing myself. That thought scared me more than anything he had said. I didn't leave. Not then. Real life doesn't move in dramatic gestures. It moves in quiet realizations, in the slow accumulation of moments that no longer fit together. But something inside me stopped shrinking that night. I didn't become stronger. I just became aware. A few days later, he said it again, almost casually, while we were folding laundry. "You really don't try anymore." This time, I looked at him. Really looked. I saw someone comfortable with the imbalance, someone who benefited from my exhaustion, someone who confused my depletion with indifference. I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I finally understood that explaining myself would not change his version of the story. He needed me to be the one who stopped trying. It made everything easier for him. That night, I wrote something down in my phone. A single sentence I didn't fully understand yet. "I'm not failing. I am tired." I stared at it until my eyes burned, not knowing that this quiet sentence would eventually change everything. After I wrote that sentence, I didn't feel relief. I felt fear. Realizing you are tired instead of broken sounds simple, but it threatens everything built on your silence. I started noticing how much of my life depended on me staying exhausted and quiet, how many systems ran smoothly only because I absorbed the friction without complaint. The apartment felt smaller after that. Every sound carried meaning. The hum of the refrigerator reminded me that I was the one who noticed when it stopped working. The school emails came to my phone because I was listed as the primary contact. The calendar on the wall was written in my handwriting. I had created a world where my effort was invisible because it never stopped. One evening, while I was helping our son with a reading assignment, my husband sat on the couch watching something on his tablet. He laughed out loud at a joke, then glanced over at me. "You never laugh like that anymore," he said. I didn't answer. I was sounding out words with a child who needed patience, not commentary. Later, after bedtime, he asked if something was wrong with me. The phrasing was careful, almost kind, but it placed the problem neatly where it hid it. With me. I told him I was tired. He nodded, but his expression said that tired was not an excuse. It was a flaw. I began to understand that my exhaustion wasn't accidental. It was the result of years of doing more, so that conflict could be avoided. Every time I picked up the slack, the gap widened. Every time I didn't ask for help, the expectations settled deeper. He hadn't asked me to carry everything. I had just never put anything down. At work, my manager praised my reliability. At home, my reliability was taken for granted. The contrast felt sharp. I could feel myself becoming two different people, one who was competent and valued, and one who was constantly disappointing no matter how much she gave. One night, I stayed late at the office, because the silence there felt easier than the tension at home. When I finally walked back into the apartment, the lights were off. He was already asleep. On the counter, there was a note. "You forgot to take out the trash." I stared at it longer than necessary. It wasn't about the trash. It never was. The next morning, I woke up with a dull ache behind my eyes, and the strange clarity that sometimes comes after emotional fatigue peaks. I realized I was grieving something I couldn't name yet. Not just the relationship, but the version of myself who believed effort would be noticed, that love would be fair. I stopped apologizing that week. When he commented on my tone, I said nothing. When he sighed about dinner, I didn't explain. I conserved my energy the way someone rations water in a drought. He noticed. Of course he did. Distance unsettles people who are used to access. One evening, he asked why I was being cold. I told him I wasn't cold, I was tired. Again. This time the word sounded different in my mouth. It sounded final. He told me relationships take work. That hurt more than I expected. I wanted to ask him what kind of work he meant, and who he thought had been doing it all along. But instead, I asked him a question that surprised both of us. When was the last time you felt tired because of us? He stared at me, confused, then defensive. He said his job was stressful. I didn't argue. Stress and exhaustion are cousins, but they don't live in the same body the same way. I nodded and let the conversation end without resolution. I was learning that not every truth needs immediate agreement. The shift didn't make things better. It made them clearer. I began to see how often my needs were reframed as inconveniences, how my limits were treated as failures. When I asked for a quiet evening, he heard rejection. When I needed rest, he heard laziness. When I stopped performing gratitude for the bare minimum, he heard ingratitude. One Saturday morning, our son asked why Daddy was always annoyed. The question landed softly and wrecked me. I told him adults get tired too, that sometimes they forget how to rest properly. I didn't mention myself. I didn't mention blame. But I felt something crack open inside me. I didn't want him to learn this pattern. I didn't want him to think love looks like depletion. That afternoon, while folding laundry again, I remembered how my husband had said I used to try. I looked at the piles of clean clothes and realized how much of my trying looked like this. Like maintenance. Like consistency. Like staying. I thought about the woman I had been before all of this. She wasn't lighter because life was easier. She was lighter because her effort had direction and return. Somewhere along the way, my effort had become expected, not appreciated, and my silence had been mistaken for agreement. The breaking point wasn't a fight. It was a moment of startling calm. He came home late one evening and asked what was wrong with dinner. I told him I hadn't cooked. He looked genuinely shocked. Why not? I said I didn't have the energy. He paused, then said, "You could have tried." Something inside me went quiet. Not numb. Clear. I looked at him and realized he truly believed that my exhaustion was a choice. That was the moment I stopped hoping he would understand. Understanding requires curiosity, and he had replaced that with expectation. That night, after our son was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table again. Same place. Different feeling. I opened my phone and reread the sentence I had written weeks earlier. I am not failing. I am tired. I added another one beneath it. Being tired does not mean I owe anyone more. I didn't announce anything. I didn't threaten to leave. I simply began redirecting my energy. I stopped filling every gap. I let things remain undone. The house grew slightly messier. His frustration grew louder. My clarity grew steadier. He accused me of changing. He was right. But not in the way he meant. I wasn't becoming distant. I was becoming visible to myself again. One evening, he asked if I was unhappy. I thought carefully before answering. I said I was exhausted from being blamed for my own depletion. He told me I was overthinking. That word used to silence me. That night, it didn't. I told him I had been trying every day, just not in ways that benefited him directly. I told him effort that keeps a life running is still effort, even if it doesn't look romantic. He listened, but his eyes told me he was already calculating what this would cost him. A week later, I scheduled a therapy appointment during my lunch break. I didn't tell him. That felt important. Sitting in that room, I spoke out loud things I had only whispered to myself. The therapist didn't diagnose me. She asked me when rest became something I had to earn. I didn't know the answer, but I cried anyway. At home, the tension became sharper. He missed the version of me that smoothed everything over. I missed myself too, but not enough to go back. The final moment came quietly. He told me again that I wasn't trying, this time with anger behind it. He said he felt neglected. I listened, really listened, and realized he was describing inconvenience, not neglect. The difference mattered. I told him I had been carrying more than my share for a long time. I told him I was tired of being measured by how easy I made his life. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. That seemed to frighten him more than any argument ever had. He asked what I wanted. The question hung between us, heavier than anything else. I thought about our son, about mornings, about sleep, about the woman I was becoming again. I said I wanted rest that didn't come with guilt, partnership that didn't require erasing myself, an effort that went both ways. He didn't have an answer. Silence again. Different this time. We didn't separate that night. Real endings rarely come with slammed doors. They come with understanding that something fundamental has shifted and cannot be unshifted. I still wake up early. I still work. I still carry a lot. But I no longer confuse exhaustion with failure. I no longer believe that being less convenient makes me less worthy. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that morning in the kitchen with the cracked mug. I wish I could tell that version of myself that running out of strength doesn't mean you stop trying. It means you tried longer than anyone noticed. And now, finally, I notice.